Earth inception. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness." Genesis chapter 1 verse 26. In whose image were earth humans made? Many of Earth's oldest scriptures imply that human development was guided by gods who descended from the sky. Even anthropologists are aware of the unusually fast development of Homo sapiens. Some anthropologists estimate that the species Homo sapiens appears to be millions of years ahead of schedule. Whereas the evolutionary development between advanced Australopithecus and Neanderthal took more than 2 million years, evidence has been found on Earth that Homo sapiens, Cro-Magnon, emerged approximately 35,000 years ago. What is even more intriguing is that while the remains of man are continually discovered, archaeologists have found remains from an even earlier Homo sapiens in the areas of Western Asia and Northern Africa. These remains date back 250,000 years before Cro-Magnon man. It should be stated here that Homo sapiens has no evolutionary precursor. Nothing evolved into Homo sapiens, the species simply appeared. Would extraterrestrials be interested in having a hand in Earth's evolution? If so, what could they gain from Earth humans? Perhaps it was a way for them to accelerate their own evolution. It seems evident there were three main groups that orchestrated the Earth inception. We identify them as the Founders, a Lyran group, and a Syrian group. The Founders facilitated the inception from a point of non-physicality and were the overseers of the entire project. Unaware of these non-physical influences, the Lyrants physically orchestrated the inception and employed a Syrian group to assist. Each group had its own motivations for their involvement. Though the motivations were different, the goal was the same: the creation of a humanoid race on Earth. As stated earlier, the Pleiadians involved themselves in Earth's evolution for their own benefit. They felt that if they interacted with humans, not only would they be able to be a part of the development of their previous home, but they could learn about negativity and integration without having to incarnate directly into a world that was playing out those ideas. They were persuaded by the Lyran group, who were well aware of the genetic compatibility of the Pleiadians with the new Earth humans being developed. The Lyran group, a combination of various Lyran races, was always experimenting. Just as humans have certain instinctive drives, such as procreation, these extraterrestrials carry their own drives which emulate their creators, the Founders. The Founders' offspring instinctively carried on with genetic seeding. These Founders were well aware that inbreeding would cause a race to die out, and thus they continually sought new stock to keep the gene pool mixed. There was another primary Lyran motivation for their involvement with Earth. After eons of conflict within the Lyran offshoot races, Vega, Sirius, Orion, etc., they were tired of creating civilizations that were polarized and failed to exist peacefully. They were determined that Earth was to be a planet founded on integration rather than polarity. The Lyran group felt that perhaps what they needed all along was a planet whose beginnings were integrated rather than one that was carrying the seeds of polarity from other star systems. With this in mind, they began formulating their rigid plan for the Earth inception. The Founders, however, had other plans. They knew Earth was possibly going to be the final ground for healing the Orion drama, and therefore must remain polarized in order to resolve the conflict. The Founders knew that the galactic family might finally learn about integration through the experience of polarity resolution on Earth. The Founders allowed the Lyran group to carry out their plan because they knew it would eventually support the cosmic plan. As for the Syrian group, their motivations were much closer to home. They considered Earth to be within the Sirius trinary star system, thus they believed they had a right to manipulate Earth genetics. The Syrians were interested simply in establishing primitive humanoid races on Earth that could serve as manual laborers while they expanded their colonies to include Earth. Thus they supported the LYRA project with their own goals in mind. The Earth Inception project began. For many thousands of years during the early phases of the Earth Inception project, the Lyrans I watched the developing primate race on Earth with cautious eyes. Occasionally they took samples and made slight alterations to the DNA structures. At critical points in development they began inserting genetic material from the Pleiadians, and other groups, into these primates. Over long periods it became increasingly apparent that evolution was accelerating at a rapid pace. When this became evident, the crucial prototype experiments were initiated. The story of Adam and Eve is one of the few legacies left that can subtly remind humanity of its beginnings. The tale contains many symbolic references to the saga that occurred concerning the type of species who were to inherit the Earth. As stated, the LYRA group wanted a species founded on integration. Therefore, they felt that the species must have no knowledge of polarity, or good, and evil. They strictly controlled the environment of these new humans so they would stay focused on developing as perfect vehicles of integration. They did not want the new humans to become like them, polarized. What the LYRA group did not acknowledge was that they were also restricting choice on the part of these new humans. After generations of working with primates and extraterrestrial genetics, the LYRA group developed a human prototype whose meaning, of the Earth, has been translated into the name, Adam. The Adam prototype was introduced on Earth to test its environmental adaptability in many areas of the planet. There were many Adams. When this prototype was satisfactorily adapted, the Adams were recalled. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall upon the man, and he slept. Then he took one of his ribs, or part of his side, and closed up the flesh at that place. 3. Through cloning and genetic engineering, a female prototype was created that is translated as Eve. Both were returned to the environment and watched closely. Out of their desire to create a species that had no knowledge of polarity, the Lyrans instructed all who tended the prototypes to forbid them knowledge, to actually deny them the right of choice which all divine beings are granted. Hence, one can see the meaning of the statement by God, "From any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, polarity, you shall not eat, for in the day that you eat from it you shall surely die." The Syrians working with the LYRA group disagreed with this philosophy. They felt the Lyrans' personal desires for creating this species was misaligned with the rights of humanoid forms. These Syrians, although wanting to develop the human race for their own purposes, discovered they had a genuine affection for the new humans. Despite this duality, they decided to intervene, thus inadvertently giving humans the opportunity to choose. The Syrian group warned the humans, and the serpent said to the woman, "You surely shall not die. For God knows that in the day you eat from it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." 6. Being presented with choice and the need for a decision involving their existence, the humans achieved third density consciousness. When the humans realized they had been deceived by God, they opted for knowledge. Once they made the choice to receive knowledge of polarity, they were fully anchored in the physical. They now possessed ego, or knowledge of I am, and became self-aware. Then the Lord God said, "Behold, the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil, polarity. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and take also from the tree of life and eat, and live forever." 7. Needless to say, the LYRA group was not pleased. In their anger they denied humans knowledge from the tree of life, divine heritage. The human race was thus forced to develop without the knowledge of its connection to the galactic family and the whole. It would truly be a challenge. To ensure that the humans did not seek this knowledge, the Lyran group employed some precautions. At the east of the garden he stationed the cherubim, and the flaming sword which turned every direction, to guard the way to the tree of life. 8. They left humanity its heritage, the legacy of Orion, symbolically portrayed as the sword, without leaving any knowledge of its resolution. There are suggestions in the ancient Sumerian texts that the cherubim are actual mechanical or robotic devices which, in this case, protect the tree of life. What is the literal translation of the tree of life? In Sumerian the word for the tree of life was jish, till. Jish meant a man-made device. Till meant, and still does today in contemporary Hebrew, missile. Instead of an actual tree, this may mean the vehicle to life, or a spaceship. In Sumerian renderings there are clear depictions of rocket ships, as well as men saluting these rocket ships. It seems clear that the action by the gods of stationing the cherubim to keep humans from the tree of life was actually denying the humans the knowledge of their heritage. No longer would the earth human be allowed to openly intermingle with the gods or leave the planet with them. Humans were banished from the heavens. What happened to the Syrian group who interfered with the plans of the Lyrans? By interfering they became energetically tied to the development of Earth. They have always had many tricks up their sleeve, and in this case they got the last laugh. When working with the Lyran group during the genetic program, they inserted a latent DNA code within the human cells. This code is triggered by an accelerating vibration that occurs when a civilization begins to evolve spiritually. As Earth accelerates toward self-awareness and fourth density, which is occurring presently, the code is activated. Once activated, the human race unwinds its limited vision like a coil until the expanse of all that is becomes visible. It was their way of allowing humanity to eat from the tree of life after all. From these early seeders of planet Earth, humanity has been left a challenge. As stated, the children, who are seeded usually carry the genetic codes and deep-seated attitudes of the parents. If indeed Earth was seeded from a point of inequality and lack of free will, might this not explain why humans of many races today still carry an underlying belief in the superiority of the Caucasian, Aryan race, the Lyran group? Could it be that the very roots of racial bigotry go as far back as the seeding of the planet? The earliest texts available to the seeker certainly suggest this. The Sumerian records give reference to the black-headed ones, who worked the mines of Africa for the gods. If this is the case, that humanity carries the patterns of its forefathers, then this challenge is just beginning. Breaking free from this godspell that has been cast over humanity may be the key to the liberation of the human race on Earth. In Earth's past the human race has received conflicting signals from the gods. There were times, some of which are recorded in the Sumerian texts, such as the Great Flood, when humans were abandoned and left to die on the planet while the gods they trusted left in their spaceships. During these times some gods, illegally, rescued chosen humans. This has created an emotional encoding within the human species during times of crisis. The encoding remembers both of these patterns and a struggle is activated between the fear of abandonment and the joy of salvation. It is imperative that the human race resolve this dependence on the gods and become self-sufficient. On present-day Earth, extraterrestrial groups whose encodings are rooted in the past still promise salvation. They come to humans as physical space beings or speak telepathically to those who can hear their frequency. Often they name various Earthhumans, commanders, or chosen ones, and continue to tempt the human ego to perpetuate their own feelings of superiority. Though these off-planet groups mean well for the most part, they continually perpetuate the gap between the fear of abandonment and the joy of salvation, thus encouraging the separative belief in elitism. As humans take their own power and enter planetary adulthood, those remnant groups will transform as well. The majority of other extraterrestrial groups have learned from their past actions and desire a resolution of this conflict once and for all. From the point of view of the founders, the plan was continuing perfectly. The LYRA group needed to play out the scenario for their own growth. These early extraterrestrial gods left behind clues on Earth that will eventually assist in awakening the planet to its heritage. As humanity awakens to this knowledge, it will begin to bring into play the tools that are needed to resolve the Orion drama. Resolution comes from allowance. If the human race can truly allow diversity within unity from a point of non-judgment, heaven on earth will be created. These Lyrans, as well as others, have been known by the Hebrew term, Nephilim, erroneously translated as giants. Nephilim literally means, those who have come down. Genesis chapter 6 verse 4 states, "The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of men and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown." The original Hebrew term translated as renown is Shem, which literally means airborne vehicle, possibly rocket ship. Hence, they were the heroes of old, people of the rocket ships. As implied previously, the Pleiadians carried Earth genetics that successfully integrated into the Lyran stock. Thus, they became the ultimate choice to seed the Terran race on Earth. The serpent is an archetypal symbol that is found in many ancient myths. The serpent's nature consistently portrays duality. It is feared but yet is a strong ally for humankind. In the Sumerian texts, Enki, the god, Sirian, who protects humanity, is also portrayed as a serpent. The judgment that the serpent is evil is more contemporary and may have been a ploy used by the gods, Lyrans, to keep humanity from following the instructions of the Sirians who were attempting to assist humankind. Zeta Reticuli. Transformation and awakening. They seek the very depths of the soul. They seek communion. Whitley Strieber. The beginnings of the Zeta Reticuli civilization can be traced back in time to the inception of the apex planet in the Lyran system by the founders. Theirs is a unique and poignant development that has significant relevance to the evolution of planet Earth. The apex planet allowed polarity, expressed through extreme individualization, to tear them apart. Their technological evolution occurred rapidly, surpassing their spiritual development, which prevented them from coexisting peacefully on their world. This imbalance in energy caused the virtual destruction of the apex planet. From the view of an observer in space, the apex world was obliterated. From the point of view of the apex inhabitants, a different story occurred. The apex planet became extremely toxic. Pollution and high-level radiation made the planet's surface uninhabitable. The Apexians who survived the catastrophe secluded themselves underground. It was imperative that integration occur within this new underground society, lest the cycle of destruction recreate itself. Recognizing its importance, they decided to force integration, fusion, through a total restructuring of their reality. As the apex planet approached its destruction, mentality and intellect were so highly developed that it was becoming noticeable in the physical forms of the Apexians. The craniums had increased in size significantly over very few generations. Natural childbirth became less and less successful because the craniums were not passing easily through the birth canal. The females simply could not adapt to the rapidity of cranial growth. Anticipating what may be a species crisis, genetic engineers began learning cloning techniques which could eventually replace the birth process. For the Apexians, this move saved their species, for after the planet's surface became uninhabitable, the Apexians found themselves sterile. Once they realized they were sterile, the Apexians decided to use it to their advantage. They no longer wanted the type of civilization they once had, they wanted to begin anew. Thus they steadfastly decided to rigidly control the genetics of their future society. Genetic engineers began work on the development of their new race. This race, they believed, would be an integrated aspect of their past. The first priority was to genetically alter the brain structures to affect emotional expression. They shunned their past expression of passion and chaos, they now wanted order. Their brains were thus altered to output a consistent chemical response to external stimuli. They achieved detachment from their ego structure. Over generations of neurochemical manipulations, the Apexians became a group mind. The individualistic expressions they were once extremely proud of were now gone. The combination of planetary radiation and the effects of their cloning began to produce a race with little physical variance from one person to the other. In order to utilize the planet's underground environment more efficiently, their bodies were created smaller in stature. In adaptation to the absence of ultraviolet light and natural sunlight, their eyes began to respond to different frequencies of the visual spectrum. Their pupils mutated to cover the entire eye, and the eyes enlarged to allow more surface space for gathering light. In response to the lack of fresh food, their bodies eventually adapted to the absorption of certain frequencies of light as nourishment. Their skin became photothermic and photovoltaic, sensitive to light sources in the underground caverns. Salvaged plants and luminiferous underground minerals aided in their nourishment. Many of their organs, such as those of the digestive and reproductive systems, thus began to atrophy. The transformation they underwent touched every aspect of their beings. A new civilization began to emerge. The force and vibration of the Apexians' previous atomic blasts eventually folded the space surrounding the apex planet, and they emerged, on the other side, of a dimensional doorway. During the underground seclusion which lasted thousands of years, the Apexians had no idea that their planet had changed its position in time and space. It wasn't until they emerged onto the planet's surface generations later that they found the star field had shifted dramatically. It was then that they knew the extent of their actions. The apex planet had shifted its position, relative to time and space, in the cosmos. It now existed, slightly off in dimension compared to the worlds they were familiar with. To understand what had occurred and use the knowledge to their benefit, they began to master the science of folding time and space. The day they finally emerged onto the planet's surface once again, they had become a new species. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes, they had managed to produce transformation from destruction. They were no longer Apexians. They now assumed a new identity, that of one people reflecting the whole. From Earth's point of view, these one people can now be called the Zeta Reticuli. Their planet, through its shift in dimension, inserted itself into the vicinity of Zeta Reticuli 1 and Zeta Reticuli 2 in the Reticulum Rhomboidalis star group. From that base they began re-establishing their connections with the founders of life. To this day they continue to carry out the wishes of the founders for galactic evolution. What they are just beginning to realize is that they are carrying out their own evolution as well. Today, the Zeta Reticuli require a way to strengthen their genetic line in order to create a future for their race. After generations of cloning using the same genetic material, they became severely inbred and stagnant in their evolutionary growth. Their race is dying, but their oversoul wishes to continue incarnating in physicality. They are deliberately keeping themselves from transitioning to fifth density in order to leave behind a seed of themselves that can genetically continue to reproduce. This will aid the galactic whole in its evolution. Recognizing their predicament, they called out to the founders. The founders introduced the reticuli to a diverse planet that genetically possessed a gene pool from many human-type species as far back as the inception of the Lyran races. Instead of the reticuli going from civilization to civilization gathering genetic material, they could now get it in one place. This planet is Earth. The reticuli were primarily attracted to Earth in the 1940s, when the planet began to possess the technology to self-destruct. They are quite aware that their past represents a future possibility for Earth. Because of their ability to travel through time, they could have gathered genetic material from any time in Earth's past. However, they needed genetic material from a period of Earth's history when civilization stands on the brink of destruction and transformation. This will aid them in their own integrative process. In a sense, it is their way of changing their past. By interacting with present-day Earth, they heal their past and change their future. Today on Earth they carry out this genetic program. Since this planet has not yet understood or embraced the idea of soul choice, most of the individuals who are participants in this genetic program consider themselves victims. There are thousands of stories of terrorized abductees who are plagued by reoccurring experiences of extraterrestrials who snatch them from their warm beds. Experiences of terror occur because humanity is not yet willing to face its own shadow, which is reflected in the mirror that the reticuli represent. The reticuli primarily seek specific human characteristics that they bred out of their race eons ago. One such characteristic is a variability of reaction to external stimuli. To relearn this, they must sample and study human neurochemical reactions to a myriad of stimuli. Their most common method of studying these neurochemical secretions is by the implantation of an organic probe. These probes are inserted into the head of the abductee through either the nose, eye, or ear cavity. These probes absorb and catalog neurochemical data and are removed periodically for study and then reinserted. Should an individual die, the organic probe can be naturally absorbed by the body. Not only are they seeking biological information from humans, but they are also seeking emotional learning as well. It has been eons since they parented children. The human nurturing ability is a fascination to them. As they begin altering their neurochemical structures, they will once again be able to respond maternally to their progeny. This is one of the primary reasons why women are abducted and asked to hold hybrid children. These human females are helping to reawaken the maternal and procreational instincts of the Zeta Reticuli. Humanity is not only helping them, they are playing a vital role for Earth as well. The founders are well aware that Earth's humanity must integrate itself on several levels or the scenario of conflict will continue. The reticuli reflect to the human race one of the most fundamental ideas that it has denied: unity. Humans reflect to the reticuli their own individuality, which terrifies them. If the gap created by humanity's fears can be bridged, transformation will occur in a most profound way. The reticuli are presently acquiring genetic material from volunteers who have, on a soul level, agreed to be a part of the awakening of the Earth and the birth of a new civilization. At this stage of the game, fear is still needed on the part of the abductees. On Earth, fear is a primary obstacle to growth. If humanity can move through fear, it will achieve many goals that presently seem out of reach. It will be done through awareness, not through the validation of victimhood. The reticuli need to confront their fear as well, which they still deny, and move through it. Without that fear, growth would be minimal. Sometimes the greatest barriers produce the greatest rewards. One of these rewards is the creation of a new hybrid race who possess the integrated qualities of the Zeta Reticuli and the Earth human. They will be unified and diverse. They will be rich with humor and fluid with their emotions. Most of all, they will be the unconditionally loving heralds who lead us back to the source of all. 10. Integration. Coming home to ourselves. And while all other creatures from their birth with downcast eyes gaze on their kindred earth, he bids man walk erect, and scan the heaven from whence his soul has sprung, to which his hopes are given. Integration means the allowance of all levels of being as valid portions of the whole. It means letting go of denial. It means embracing ourselves as well as each other. Just as our unified consciousness created this realm of polarity, we can transform it. When integration occurs, this realm will become defined by very different parameters. We will become the archetypes as well as the founders. We will shift perspective and become conscious of ourselves as the creator. It does not necessarily mean that our identities will be absorbed. It could mean that we will awaken to the point where we will consciously choose our destinies. Perhaps we may choose to enter other realms and be the unseen friends for planetary societies still playing the game of separation. We may even be another planet's extraterrestrials, pondering the same decisions regarding interference that our forefathers faced. In stilling ourselves and listening closely, we can hear and feel the undercurrents of this transformation. Existence and change are the only constants. We can play the game of illusion that we are an accidental creation, but sooner or later we tap ourselves on the shoulder and the game is up. In Earth's reality we have created the Arcturans, Sirians, Lyrans, Orions, Reticuli, Pleiadians, etc., to be the selves who tap us on the shoulder. They are really part of the same one thing, us. So how on earth do we encourage integration to take place? First of all, we must know that it will take place with or without our conscious action. The difference is only that conscious action will allow the journey to be more enjoyable. We will feel more in control of our destinies. The conscious action that will accelerate our integration process is very simple: allowance. If we allow on all levels in which the integration takes place, we will see our paths unfold before us joyously. Integration will take place on 4 main levels: mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. Mental. For us to integrate our mentality means that we allow ourselves to combine not only our cerebral processes, but our intuitive and emotional ones as well. The kind of thought today that is validated most is almost entirely head-centered. Formulas and calculations determine the reality of 20th century Earth. If we can allow ourselves to understand that the intuitive and emotional processes are just as valid and can be used in combination with the mental, we will be well on our way toward integrating our mentality. Emotional. Integrating emotionally means that we begin learning how to embrace our shadow self. We can start opening inner closets and digging deep into the subconscious for beliefs which hold us back. More often than not, these neglected parts of ourselves only want attention. As the Pleiadians and the Lyrans before them discovered, denial only prolongs the pain of existence. Let us learn from these other selves on distant worlds. Let us not repeat the same lessons over and over again. Spiritual. To integrate spiritually is perhaps the easiest of all. Each person possesses an inner spirituality that is not connected to doctrine. If we can release the doctrine and touch the innate spirituality, we begin the integration process. It extends outward onto the planet by the honoring of every person's truth as a manifestation of the one truth. This allows each of us to coexist within our philosophies without needing to change each other's beliefs. The fact that God, all that is exists is not changed by our argument over which color robe he wears. We are so afraid of being alone and separate that we create even more separation through our desire to have a unified doctrine. If we have the courage to begin touching this inner spirituality, we will see our transformation blossom. Physical. Integration physically is slightly different. It involves an acknowledgement of our past and our history as being part of a grander scenario on a cosmic scale. From the source and the founders we fragmented. We have stretched our individualization to its outer limits. Coming together will require us to once again acknowledge and accept ourselves as part of our galactic family. As we move through our racial fears and stop allowing skin color and cultural differences to be barriers between us, we also move through our fears by celebrating the communion that the Zeta Reticuli offer us. We can allow integration on all levels into our physical life here on Earth. Not one of us is from another place. We are from the source, and the source is vast. To say we are from the Pleiades is a denial of all the other ideas that we are. Our terrestrial selves become confused if we continually deny that our existence is part of the planet's body. We are of all that is. If we feel a connection to an off-planet race, we are identifying with what they represent or with various lives we have lived in that system. If individuals insist on stating they are from somewhere, the suggestion is offered that they proclaim their alliance with Earth. They have chosen a life here. In a very real sense, Earth people can be seen as models for integration. We are divine and terrestrial, of gods and men. We are proof positive that human life can adapt to seemingly insurmountable circumstances. Let us celebrate humanity. There are no space brothers who are really going to save us, they are too busy saving themselves. We are not children. Though we are still playing the game of unawareness somewhat, we are looked at by other civilizations as an enigma. We are the civilization that refused to die. Our resilience and faith in our abilities has continually proven our worth. We refused to be dominated and used by the Lyran group in the Garden of Eden. Various plagues by the gods have not succeeded in wiping us out. Thanks to Noah and the Syrian overlord who warned him, we have a flourishing civilization today. Many have wondered why Earth has been observed by so many extraterrestrial groups. Perhaps we are a predictable demonstration of integration in action. It may be painful, but in our mass-conscious belief, pain can produce miraculous results. Earth of the present and Earth of the future is indeed that miracle. Let us celebrate that miracle by integrating ourselves and taking responsibility for our planetary reality. We are part of an association of worlds and our membership is up for renewal. This time, membership requires our awakening to the cosmic drama of which we've agreed to be a part. Our awakening will lead us home, to ourselves.